The patrol car rolled in slowly, tires crunching against loose gravel as the red and blue lights washed over the empty street. It was just past 10:30 p.m., the kind of hour when silence settles in and small sounds feel louder than they should. A single sedan sat pulled over beneath a flickering streetlight, engine still running, hazard lights blinking in steady rhythm. Inside the car, a woman sat upright behind the wheel, hands resting calmly at 10 and 2, eyes forward. Officer Grant stepped out first. His boots hit the pavement with deliberate weight. He adjusted his belt, glanced at his partner, and smirked as he approached the driver's side window. Routine stop. That's what it was supposed to be. The woman lowered her window halfway. License and registration, Grant said, already leaning closer, his flashlight beam sweeping across the dashboard. Then her face. She complied without hesitation, reaching into her purse with slow, deliberate movements. Her demeanor was calm, professional, controlled. Not fearful. Not defiant. Just composed. Grant noticed it immediately. You know why I pulled you over? He asked. No, officer, she replied evenly. I don't believe I was speeding. He exhaled through his nose, unimpressed. Your brake light's out. She nodded once. Understood. As she handed him her license, his eyes dropped to the name, then back up to her face. Something in his expression shifted, not alarm, not recognition, but mild irritation. Like he'd expected someone else. That he glanced at the license again, then chuckled under his breath. Ma'am, he said, holding the card between two fingers, this isn't funny. I'm not joking, she replied calmly. You expect me to believe this is real? He asked, turning the card sideways, inspecting it like a prop from a bad movie. Internal Affairs investigator? That's what you're going with tonight? The woman didn't react. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't reach for her phone. She simply looked at him. Yes, she said. That's my badge. Grant let out a short laugh and turned toward his partner, who was now standing a few feet back, watching with mild curiosity. Hey, you hear this? Grant called out. She says she's Internal Affairs. His partner smirked. Yeah. And I'm the police commissioner. They both laughed. The woman's eyes didn't move. Her posture didn't change. She sat still, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, as if waiting for something inevitable to arrive. Grant leaned closer, his tone shifting from amused to patronizing. Listen, ma'am. I don't know who you're trying to impress, but flashing a fake badge is a serious offense. You want to rethink that story before this gets worse? She met his gaze. Calm. Steady. Unshaken. There's no story, she said. You can run the badge number. That was the moment the air changed. Grant straightened slightly, irritation flickering across his face. The idea that she wasn't backing down annoyed him more than the claim itself. He turned back toward his cruiser, muttering something under his breath, and began tapping into the onboard system. The street went quiet again. Inside the car, the woman's reflection stared back at her from the windshield. She had dealt with this before. The doubt. The disbelief. The immediate assumption that she didn't belong where she was. She had learned long ago that patience was power, especially when the truth didn't need defending. Behind her, the officer's radio crackled softly. Grant's expression changed, not dramatically. Not suddenly, just enough. He leaned closer to the screen. Typed again. Paused. His jaw tightened. He glanced back at the woman, then back at the terminal. His partner noticed. What is it? He asked. Grant didn't answer right away. The glow from the dashboard illuminated his face as the realization began to form. Slow, uncomfortable, unwelcome. The name on that license wasn't fake, the badge number wasn't fictional, and the department listed beside it wasn't some obscure office no one had heard of. It was Internal Affairs, the very division that investigated officers like him. The woman in the car wasn't nervous. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't explaining. She was waiting for the moment when the power in the situation shifted, not loudly, not violently, but decisively, and as the seconds stretched, the weight of that realization began to press down on the two officers standing under the streetlight, unaware that this routine stop was about to become something far bigger than either of them had imagined. The silence thickened around the patrol car, stretching longer than it should have. The hum of the engine, the faint buzz of the streetlight, the distant sound of traffic several blocks away, all of it felt suddenly amplified, as if the night itself was listening. Officer Grant cleared his throat and stepped away from the cruiser. His confidence didn't vanish, but it wavered. Just enough. He walked back toward the driver's side, posture stiff, shoulders squared a little too deliberately. His partner, Officer Lewis, stayed near the rear of the vehicle, arms crossed, eyes darting between Grant and the woman in the car. "All right," Grant said, forcing a casual tone. "Step out of the vehicle for me." The request wasn't aggressive. It didn't need to be. Authority often wore a calm face. The woman nodded once and opened the door slowly, deliberately. She stepped out into the glow of the streetlight, her movements controlled, deliberate, almost ceremonial. She stood straight, hands visible at her sides, meeting Grant's gaze without challenge or submission. "Is there a reason I'm being asked to step out?" she asked. "Standard procedure," Grant replied quickly. "Just want to clear a few things up." She didn't argue. She didn't resist. She took one step away from the car and waited. Grant gestured toward the hood of the patrol vehicle. "Go ahead and stand right there." She complied. From a distance, anyone watching might have thought this was routine, another traffic stop, another late-night interaction between police and a driver. But the energy had shifted. Something unspoken hung in the air. Grant circled her slowly, eyes scanning her clothes, her posture, her face, searching for cracks. For nerves. For something to justify the tightening in his chest. "Where are you coming from tonight?" he asked. "From work," she replied. "And where do you work?" he pressed. She met his gaze again. "You already saw that on the badge." Grant exhaled sharply. "I'm asking you to answer the question." "I did," she said calmly. The silence that followed wasn't defiance. It was discipline. Grant's jaw tightened. "You know, impersonating an officer or a government official is a felony," he said. "People have gone to jail for less." "I'm aware," she replied, her voice never wavered. Behind them, Officer Lewis shifted his weight, unease creeping into his expression. He had begun to sense it too, the subtle imbalance. This woman wasn't bluffing. She wasn't emotional. She wasn't scrambling for excuses. She was waiting. Grant stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Last chance. Tell me where you got that badge." The woman looked straight ahead. "From the issuing authority." Something flickered across Grant's face, irritation edged with uncertainty. He turned sharply and walked back to the cruiser, opening the door with more force than necessary. He leaned in, typing again, scrolling faster this time. Lewis approached cautiously. "You good?" he asked under his breath. Grant didn't answer right away. The radio crackled. Dispatch confirmed the name again. "The department." "The division, Internal Affairs." The words landed heavier the second time. Grant swallowed. His knuckles tightened around the edge of the laptop. "Run it again," he muttered. Lewis frowned. "It's the same." Grant straightened slowly and looked back at the woman. The confidence he'd worn earlier was gone, replaced by calculation. He stepped away from the cruiser and approached her once more, this time with a different energy. Less authority. "More restraint, ma'am," he said, tone noticeably altered. "We just need to verify a few things." She met his eyes calmly. "You've already verified what you need to." The air felt thick now. Heavy. Like a room before a storm. Grant's radio chirped softly. A dispatcher's voice filtered through, routine but unmistakably formal. "Unit 12, be advised, that individual is flagged as Internal Affairs, Active Investigation Unit." There was no mistaking it this time. Grant's face drained of color. For a moment, no one spoke. The streetlight flickered above them, bathing the scene in a harsh, unforgiving glow. The woman remained still, composed, hands at her sides, the picture of control. Officer Lewis took a small step back. Grant swallowed hard, then forced himself to stand straighter. The authority he'd been wielding moments earlier now felt fragile, brittle. He glanced at his partner, then back at the woman. "Ma'am," he said, choosing each word carefully now, "there seems to have been a misunderstanding." She tilted her head slightly. "Is that so?" The shift was complete. What began as a routine stop had turned into something else entirely, something with consequences, and for the first time since the flashing lights came on, Grant realized he was no longer in control of the situation. The balance of power had begun to tilt. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, not empty, but charged. Grant shifted his stance, adjusting his belt again as if grounding himself in routine could restore the control he felt slipping away. "All right," he said, voice steadier than his expression. "Let's slow this down." The woman said nothing. That silence unsettled him more than resistance ever could. He took a step back, then another, creating distance that wasn't procedural, it was defensive. The confidence he had carried at the start of the stop was now fractured, replaced by something sharper, more desperate, the need to reassert authority before it disappeared completely. "Ma'am," he continued, "for my safety and yours, I'm going to need you to place your hands behind your back." The words hung in the air. Officer Lewis turned sharply. "Grant, it's just temporary," Grant interrupted, eyes still fixed on the woman. "Standard until we clear things up." The woman's gaze didn't waver, but something subtle changed in her posture. Not fear. Not resistance. Awareness. "On what grounds?" she asked calmly. Grant exhaled through his nose. "Failure to comply with lawful instructions." "I've complied with every lawful instruction you've given," she replied evenly. "I've identified myself. I've remained still. I've answered your questions." Her voice was measured, professional, the tone of someone used to speaking under pressure without raising it. Grant's jaw tightened. The word lawful lingered between them, uncomfortably precise. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I'm giving you an order." There it was, the moment where authority stopped being about safety and became about control. The woman looked at him steadily. "And I'm telling you," she said, "that you're about to cross a line you can't step back from." The night felt suddenly smaller. Closer. Even the distant traffic noise seemed to fade. Grant reached for his cuffs. Officer Lewis shifted uneasily. "Grant, maybe we should." "Not now," Grant snapped. He took hold of the woman's wrist, firm but not yet forceful. That was the moment everything changed. Her voice remained calm, but it carried weight now, not defiance, not fear, but certainty. "You're detaining an internal affairs investigator without cause," she said clearly. "Every second you continue is being documented." Grant froze for half a second. Just long enough to realize what he was doing. Then, instead of releasing her, he tightened his grip. "Turn around," he ordered. The street seemed to hold its breath. The woman slowly complied, placing her hands behind her back. Not because she had to, but because she chose to let the moment play out. Lewis looked away, jaw clenched. As Grant reached for the cuffs, his radio crackled again. This time louder. "More urgent, Unit 12, stand by. Supervisor en route." Grant stiffened. "Copy," he replied, voice tight. He clipped one cuff around the woman's wrist. The metal clicked softly in the quiet street. That sound carried weight, not power, but consequence. The woman didn't resist. She didn't speak. She simply stood there, calm and composed, as if watching someone else make a mistake in slow motion. Grant finished securing the cuffs, his movements mechanical now. The authority he was trying to project felt hollow, almost performative. He stepped back, breathing shallowly. Lewis finally spoke again, quieter this time. "Grant, this isn't going to go how you think." Grant didn't answer. Instead, he turned the woman slightly toward the patrol car, guiding her forward. The motion was careful now, restrained, as if he knew every touch was being weighed. As they walked, the woman finally spoke again. "Do you know what internal affairs does?" she asked calmly. Grant's jaw tightened. "We investigate patterns," she continued. "We document behavior. We identify misconduct long before anyone realizes they're being watched." He stopped walking, the words sank in slowly, heavily. She turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. "Tonight," she said softly, "you didn't stop a suspect. You created a record." For a moment, the night felt unbearably still, then the radio crackled again. "Unit 12, Supervisor is 2 minutes out." Grant swallowed hard, the realization settled in fully now. This was no longer a routine stop spiraling out of control. This was evidence. This was oversight. This was a test he was failing in real time. That he looked at the woman in front of him, cuffed yet composed, and understood something too late that he hadn't exposed her. He had exposed himself. The streetlight flickered again, casting long shadows across the pavement as the sound of approaching sirens grew louder in the distance. The consequences were coming. The sound of the approaching siren cut through the stillness like a blade. Not rushed. Not panicked. Controlled. Deliberate. Grant's eyes flicked toward the end of the street, where the distant glow of headlights began to crest the hill. Red and blue lights reflected faintly off parked cars, off windows, off the polished surface of the cruiser beside them. He exhaled slowly, as if bracing himself. The woman stood cuffed beside him, posture straight, expression unchanged. She didn't look angry. She didn't look afraid. She looked patient. Like someone who had already read the ending of the story. Officer Lewis shifted his stance, clearly unsettled. "Supervisor's coming in hot," he muttered. Grant didn't respond. The approaching vehicle slowed, then pulled in behind them. Tires crunched against gravel. A door opened. Another set of footsteps joined the scene, heavier, more deliberate. Sergeant Alvarez stepped into the light. He took in the scene quickly. The cruiser angled on the shoulder, the woman in cuffs, Grant standing rigid beside her, Lewis hovering uncertainly nearby. His eyes narrowed, assessing details, reading body language the way only years on the job could teach someone to do. "What's going on here?" Alvarez asked. Grant spoke first. "Routine traffic stop, Sarge." Subject presented a badge claiming internal affairs. "Verification in progress." Alvarez's gaze shifted to the woman. "Is that correct, ma'am?" he asked. "Yes," she replied calmly. "My identification was already verified by dispatch." Alvarez glanced back at Grant, then down at the cuffs. "Why is she restrained?" he asked. Grant hesitated, just a fraction too long. "For officer safety." Alvarez's jaw tightened. "Did she threaten you?" "No." "Resist?" "No." "Attempt to flee?" "No." The silence that followed felt heavier than any raised voice could have been. Alvarez stepped closer to the woman. "May I see your badge?" She nodded slightly. "It's in my jacket pocket. Left side." Alvarez reached carefully, retrieved the badge, and studied it under the streetlight. His expression changed almost immediately, not surprise, but recognition. He looked up at her. "Ma'am, apologies for the inconvenience." Grant stiffened. Alvarez turned to him slowly. "Why is she in cuffs?" Grant swallowed. "Protocol," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Alvarez exhaled through his nose. "Protocol doesn't override common sense." He nodded toward the cuffs. "Remove them." Grant hesitated, just long enough to make the moment uncomfortable. "Now," Alvarez repeated. The metallic click echoed sharply as Grant unlocked the cuffs and pulled them away. The woman flexed her wrists once, calmly, as if shedding something insignificant. "Thank you," she said to Alvarez. He nodded respectfully. "Ma'am." The shift was unmistakable. The authority in the scene had realigned. Alvarez turned his attention fully to Grant now. His tone was quiet but heavy. "Walk me through your decision-making process." Grant straightened, instinctively defensive. "She claimed to be internal affairs. I needed to verify. And during that verification," Alvarez continued, "you chose to detain her." Grant hesitated. "For officer safety." Alvarez's eyes hardened. "At what point did she pose a threat?" Grant opened his mouth, then closed it. The street felt silent again, the kind of silence that magnifies every mistake. Alvarez glanced at Lewis. "Did you feel threatened?" Lewis shifted uncomfortably. No, sir. Alvarez nodded slowly. Then explain to me why a verified internal affairs investigator was placed in handcuffs. Grant's jaw clenched. She was uncooperative. The woman spoke then, her voice calm but firm. I answered every question. I complied with every instruction. I did not resist. Alvarez held Grant's gaze. Is that accurate? A long pause. Yes, Grant admitted quietly. Alvarez exhaled, the weight of disappointment clear. Then this stop is no longer about procedure, he said. It's about judgment. He turned to the woman. Ma'am, I apologize for what you've experienced tonight. She inclined her head slightly. Apology noted. Alvarez turned back to Grant. You're relieved of duty for the remainder of the shift. Grant blinked. Sir, badge and weapon, Alvarez said firmly. The words landed like a blow. Grant's face drained of color. Slowly, he unholstered his service weapon and placed it in Alvarez's open hand. Then he removed his badge, hesitating before letting it go. The metal clinked softly as it hit the sergeant's palm. Lewis looked away. Alvarez turned to the woman again. Ma'am, Internal Affairs will be notified of the full incident report. You'll receive the footage and all documentation. She nodded once. Thank you. The street was silent again, but it was a different kind of quiet now, not tension, but reckoning. Grant stood there, empty-handed, watching the balance of power shift completely away from him. The woman took a small step forward, her voice steady. This didn't have to happen, she said. He didn't respond. Behind them, the cruiser's lights continued to flash, bathing the scene in red and blue, no longer symbols of authority, but of consequence. The power had changed hands, and it wasn't coming back. The street felt different once the decision had been made. The flashing lights still painted the pavement in red and blue, but their meaning had shifted. What once symbolized authority now felt like exposure, a spotlight that refused to turn away. Grant stood off to the side, shoulders tense, hands empty. Without the badge or the weight of his weapon at his hip, he looked smaller. Stripped not just of authority, but of certainty. The uniform still clung to him, but it no longer carried power. It carried consequence. Alvarez stepped aside and spoke quietly into his radio, requesting a transport unit and internal affairs oversight. His tone was procedural, detached, as if deliberately removing emotion from a situation that had already become heavy with it. The woman stood nearby, composed, watching everything unfold with measured calm. She did not gloat. She did not lecture. Her restraint spoke louder than any accusation could have. Lewis hovered near the cruiser, eyes darting between Grant and the woman. The realization was settling in for him too, that proximity to misconduct carried its own gravity. He had followed orders, but now he questioned which ones he should have challenged. A second set of headlights approached and slowed. Another patrol car pulled in, followed shortly by an unmarked sedan. Doors opened. More officers stepped out, faces serious, movements efficient. Word had spread. Grant felt it in the way they looked at him, not with anger, not even judgment, but with something worse, recognition. One of the arriving officers approached Alvarez. Internal Affairs is en route. They're requesting initial statements from everyone on scene. Alvarez nodded. They'll get them. He turned to Grant again. You'll remain here until relieved. Grant nodded stiffly. His voice was barely audible. Yes, sir. The woman shifted slightly, crossing her arms as the cool night air crept in. An officer approached her respectfully, offering a jacket. She accepted with a nod, draping it over her shoulders. The small gesture didn't go unnoticed. Cameras began to appear, not professional news crews yet, but phones. From passing cars. From nearby houses where lights flicked on and silhouettes appeared in windows. The quiet suburban street was becoming a stage. Grant noticed it too. His jaw tightened as he glanced around, realizing that this moment, this exact moment, would live far beyond this street. A supervisor approached the woman. Ma'am, would you be willing to provide a brief statement on record? She nodded. Of course. A body camera was activated. The red light blinked steadily. She spoke clearly, calmly, without embellishment. She described the stop. The questioning. The moment the encounter shifted. Her words were precise, factual, impossible to twist. As she spoke, Grant stared at the ground. He could hear his own actions reflected back at him, stripped of context, stripped of justification. Just facts. Just behavior. When she finished, the supervisor thanked her and turned away. A few feet away, Grant felt something settle in his chest, a realization he could no longer avoid. This wasn't just a bad night, this was the beginning of a record. A formal complaint. An investigation. A review of body camera footage. Statements from multiple officers. A timeline that would be dissected frame by frame. The consequences were no longer hypothetical. Another officer approached Grant. "Internal Affairs wants to speak with you now." Grant nodded numbly and followed, his movements heavy. As he passed the woman, he stopped. For a moment, it looked like he might speak, then he seemed to think better of it. He walked on. The woman watched him go, her expression unreadable. There was no satisfaction in her eyes. No triumph. Only resolve. She turned as the supervisor approached again. "You're free to leave whenever you're ready," he said. "Transportation can be arranged." She shook her head. "I'll drive." He hesitated. "Your car, I'll be fine," she said calmly. The supervisor nodded. "If you need anything further, you have my direct line." She accepted the card and placed it in her pocket. As the activity around her continued, she took a moment to breathe. The night air was cool, grounding. The street no longer felt hostile, just quiet, almost solemn. She walked back toward her vehicle, passing Grant one last time. Their eyes met briefly. He looked away first. She unlocked her car, got in, and closed the door. The engine turned over smoothly. For a moment, she sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, collecting herself. This wasn't victory. It was accountability. She pulled away slowly, the headlights cutting through the darkness as she merged back onto the road. Behind her, the scene continued to unfold, supervisors conferring, officers being reassigned, statements being recorded. The system grinding forward, imperfect but moving, and as the patrol lights faded in her rearview mirror, one truth remained clear: the consequences had only just begun. The following days unfolded with a quiet intensity, the kind that doesn't announce itself with sirens or headlines, but moves through hallways, inboxes, and closed-door meetings. The incident report circulated quickly. At first, it moved through internal channels, supervisors, command staff, legal review. Then it reached higher floors. Offices where names were etched into frosted glass. Where careers were measured not in years on the street, but in decisions made behind closed doors. Body camera footage was pulled, not clips. Not excerpts, everything. The footage showed the stop from beginning to end. The tone. The posture. The moment authority slipped into assumption. The point where caution turned into control. The quiet escalation that never needed to happen. Those reviewing it didn't need commentary. The evidence spoke with precision. Internal Affairs formally opened a case within 48 hours. Not quietly. Not procedurally. Officially, Grant was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. His weapon and badge remained surrendered. His access suspended. His name added to a growing file that would now follow him through every future review. Lewis was reassigned temporarily, removed from patrol duties while his conduct was evaluated. Though he had not initiated the stop, his silence, his failure to intervene, was noted. Supervisors were called in for interviews. Training records were pulled. Prior complaints resurfaced. Patterns began to form. What had begun as a single traffic stop was becoming a mirror held up to the department itself. Inside Internal Affairs, the woman sat at a conference table, files spread neatly before her. She reviewed bodycam footage frame by frame, cross-referencing timestamps with radio logs, dispatch records, and policy manuals. There was no anger in her movements. No satisfaction, only focus. She documented inconsistencies. Marked deviations from protocol. Noted moments where discretion became misuse. This was the part of the job few ever saw, the long, methodical work after the headlines faded. The part that turned moments into precedents. Across the department, the effects rippled outward. Mandatory retraining sessions were scheduled. Supervisors were instructed to re-evaluate use of authority policies. Body camera compliance audits were expanded. Language once treated as routine was now scrutinized under a different lens. Quietly, but unmistakably, standards were being reset. Word spread among officers, not in official memos, in locker rooms, in squad cars, in lowered voices between shifts. Did you hear what happened on Maple Street? They say Internal Affairs was already watching. He didn't even know who he stopped. The story evolved with each retelling, but the lesson remained clear. Assumptions had consequences, and accountability, once triggered, moved without mercy. The woman's role remained largely invisible to the public. There were no press conferences. No statements. No victory laps. That anonymity was intentional. The work wasn't about recognition. It was about correction. A few days later, a departmental bulletin went out, carefully worded, legally precise. It outlined changes in field conduct expectations, reinforced de-escalation requirements, and reiterated disciplinary consequences for violations. To the outside world, it looked like routine policy maintenance. Inside the department, it felt like a line being redrawn. Grant sat alone at his kitchen table the morning he received formal notice of the investigation's findings. The document was thick, methodical, unforgiving. That he read every word. There were no insults, no moral lectures. Just facts. The conclusions were clear: improper escalation, failure to follow protocol, unjustified detention. Corrective action would follow. He stared at the page for a long time after finishing. The house was silent. Somewhere in the city, the woman continued her work. Reviewing cases, sitting in meetings, writing reports that would shape policy and quietly redirect behavior across the department. She did not seek apologies, she did not need acknowledgement. The change itself was the outcome. Months later, new training modules would reference a recent internal review as a case study, anonymized, procedural, stripped of drama, but the impact remained. Officers paused longer before making assumptions. Supervisors intervened sooner. Language shifted. Tone softened. Not everywhere, not perfectly, but noticeably, and that was the point, because real reform rarely arrives with applause. It arrives through documentation, accountability, and the slow recalibration of power. The night of the stop faded into memory, but its consequences continued to ripple outward, quietly reshaping the system from the inside. And somewhere between policy updates and disciplinary hearings, the balance tipped just enough for change to take hold. Weeks passed, but the memory of that night never faded. For the department, for the officers involved, and for the woman who had simply done her job. It lingered like the echo of a bell, subtle yet impossible to ignore, a reminder that authority carries responsibility, and that every decision, no matter how small it seems in the moment, can ripple outward with consequences that cannot be undone. Grant had returned home after the investigation concluded. Administrative leave had stretched longer than expected. He spent hours reflecting on the choices he made, the moments he could have paused, questioned, or stepped back. He understood now that authority was not a shield for ego or impulse. It was a trust, fragile and easily broken. And when misused, the repercussions were both personal and systemic. He reviewed the footage again, not because he doubted it, but because he needed to see the truth laid bare. The images of that street, the handcuffs, the quiet composure of the woman in control, reminded him that power without accountability is fragile. The lesson was unmistakable: systems are only as strong as the people who uphold them, and authority is meaningless if wielded without integrity. The woman, meanwhile, returned to her office in the days that followed, walking through the familiar corridors with quiet purpose. Colleagues passed by, some offering brief nods of acknowledgement, but the real recognition came in the changes taking shape. Officers attended retraining sessions. Supervisors reviewed protocols. Policies were revised to prevent the same mistakes from repeating. She watched, satisfied in the silent way of those who understand that true justice is measured not in accolades, but in impact. her phone buzzed occasionally, inquiries from colleagues, reports requiring review, reminders of cases still in motion. She did not dwell on the incident for herself. The world had already shifted around her, quietly but irreversibly. Accountability had been served, and now the system itself was learning that in quiet moments, she reflected on what had made the night so pivotal. Not the cuffs, not the confrontation, not even the fear that had rippled through the patrol officers. It was the calm assertion of truth, the unwavering adherence to facts, the quiet power of professional integrity that had turned the tide. One person, fully committed to doing what was right, had catalyzed reform. The story of that night would never appear on headlines or in viral clips, but its effects were real. Officers approached stops differently. Supervisors scrutinized procedures with renewed diligence. Dispatchers verified information more carefully. Internal affairs received fewer complaints about assumption-driven detentions, because the culture had shifted, if only slightly, toward reflection and restraint. The emotional closure came quietly. For the woman, it was knowing she had fulfilled her duty with professionalism and patience. For Grant, it was the painful recognition of failure, tempered with the understanding that reform could still emerge from consequence. For the department, it was the beginning of a subtle transformation, a recalibration of power, responsibility, and justice that would resonate for years to come. This was the core of accountability, not the humiliation, not the fear, but the system learning, evolving, and improving because one person had stood firmly in truth and integrity. To the audience listening now, the lesson is clear. Injustice may arise in unexpected places. Authority may be misused, arrogance may appear unchallenged, and routine moments may conceal the potential for harm. But calm intelligence, patience, and adherence to principle can reverse even the gravest imbalances of power. Standing for accountability does not require force, it requires vigilance, courage, and unwavering focus on facts. The call to action is simple, but vital. Observe carefully, question responsibly, and never assume compliance is consent to misuse of power. Speak up when authority is abused, document thoroughly, and trust in processes designed to correct injustice. Change begins quietly, through consistent, principled action, but its effects can be profound, reshaping systems and restoring fairness where it has been eroded. The night on that quiet suburban street may have ended hours ago, but its impact continues to ripple outward. A woman in control of truth held authority to account, and in doing so, she reminded the world, and herself, that justice is not just a moment. It is a practice, a commitment, a standard that must be upheld at every turn. And as the lights fade from the street, as the patrol cars return to their stations, and as the officers go back to their routines, the echoes of accountability remain. The power of law, wielded responsibly, can recalibrate even the most fragile balance. The ripple of one careful, deliberate act can reform a system quietly, but decisively. It is not instantaneous. It is not loud. But it is enduring. Justice, in its most potent form, is not a confrontation. It is a measured, deliberate correction. And that is a lesson worth carrying forward, for officers, for institutions, and for every person who believes that fairness, integrity, and accountability are not optional, but essential.